What is the essential difference between Western civilization and Chinese civilization? Western civilization puts more emphasis on the idea of humanism, that is, human beings must fight and defeat nature. Chinese civilization puts more emphasis on the idea of nature-oriented, that is, man is a part of nature, and man and nature have the same origin and laws, and man must conform to nature. Heaven and man are one. After all, man is not the whole of nature, and other parts of nature are also. It will affect and threaten the survival of human beings. In order to dominate human beings, we must fight and transform the natural world. Man will conquer nature, and heaven and man are opposed. Nature is the basis and environment for human existence, and human beings must live in harmony with it, the fusion of nature and man. Superficial views do not know right. The West is a beastly jungle built on the basis of robbery, killing, fraud, and concealment. Find out how Americans got their hands on America? Go ask which of the ancestors of Western monopoly capital was not a robber or a criminal. Go and see where there are no Europeans and Americans behind the scenes in the war-torn areas of the world. In fact, the West also had a long dark period, but after the Industrial Revolution, it made great progress, like today. The development of my country's farming civilization is too mature, and it can't turn around at once, and it seems to be lagging behind. Now learn from Western civilization humbly and use it for me, why not? What's wrong with two civilizations learning from each other's strengths to create a new Chinese civilization? People are not ruthless because they are familiar with plants and trees. Humans are advanced animals with thoughts, not mindless plants. Now that there are thoughts, there will be 7 emotions and 6 desires. If you have the emotions and desires, you will pursue self-development. It can only be constrained by the framework of the law and cannot be suppressed by force. Respect for humanity. Respect the natural laws of human nature. A harmonious and developing society. The so-called civilization of the West is a barbaric and naked plunder, massacre, and destruction. It is only in the cultural class and cannot rise to the height of civilization. The laws and laws of the animal world are always at the low level of culture. What represents civilization is order. What is the difference between a society without order and rules and the animal world? For the Chinese civilization, we belong to the descendants of the Chinese civilization, the Eastern civilization, and her genetic roots are mostly linked by clans and nationalities, forming a Chinese civilization community, including the Chinese ethnic groups at home and abroad, so Chinese civilization is born the link of continuous inheritance. The speaker is only the inheritor of family culture, Chinese culture. It is inclusive, and the foreign things are finally contained and prosperous, and then become their own things. And Western culture. The difference from Chinese culture is that it does not include other cultures, but excludes them. Use its strengths and rebuke its weaknesses. This has nothing to do with inclusion. For example, Will Yuanhua, Xiannu, Xianbei, Hu, Di, Jian, Emperor Xian of the Northern Wei dynasty reformed, asked his subjects to wear Han costumes, and learn Han culture. Change your name to a Chinese name. If there were no Emperor Xian of the Northern Wei dynasty, and the integration of Xianbei and Han people, then Chinese civilization might have a different pattern. Stop talking about Western civilization, Eastern civilization, and Indian civilization. There is only one civilization on our planet, and that is human civilization, Earth civilization. The Western civilization and Eastern civilization you mentioned are nothing more than cultural differences. Eastern culture, Western culture, Indian culture, etc. Mencius Sunzi of China has long put forward that nature is good and nature is evil. Why is Mencius higher than Sunzi in China? Confucianism advocates that education can correctly guide human nature to the good side, which is also in line with the Chinese theory of yin and yang, punishing evil to promote kindness. Our society promotes the kind side more, hoping to guide people's hearts to the kind side, not that we deny the ugly side of our own hearts. Both Western civilization and Chinese civilization belong to human civilization. No system is perfect, and human beings have not yet reached this level of civilization. However, freedom, equality, human rights and a happy life are the common pursuit of mankind. On this road, the degree, stage, and method of each civilization's development are different. They are constantly groping forward. Scholars don't have to be so narrow-minded. There is no need to use the ugly phenomenon of a certain person, a certain era, or a certain region in the human process to belittle or elevate a certain party. Is self-hacking popular now? When it comes to the endless self-deprecation of Chinese civilization, and the lack of development of Western civilization, is it because of self-deprecation that everyone is drunk and I am alone? Which civilization is more suitable for the long-term stability of the world, daytime, or the jungle? Which culture is more inclusive? Is the original English version Kexiyang right? If you really look deeply at the history of the East and the West, don't be fooled by an accidental fluctuation of 200 or 300 years in the long river of history. To figure out the difference between Taoism and art, the whole civilization is actually going in the wrong direction. The West studies people and things, China studies people and people, India and Egypt study people and gods. Facts have proved that people and things are the easiest to break through, but it is a dead end. Even if the technology is 10,000 times more advanced, it can't solve these problems. Our ancestors, especially those before the Han and Tang dynasties, observed the world from a higher dimension. Look at the double-slit interference experiment of quantum mechanics, the most macroscopic and the most microscopic. The concept of our ancestors' heaven, earth, and man is right. The essence of Western civilization and Chinese civilization are both earth civilizations. In the long river of history, their respective pursuits of spiritual civilization and material civilization have different priorities in terms of time, and there have been similarities and minor differences. Man and nature is an eternal topic. The Milky Way has not been explored clearly. Everyone worked hard. It is suggested that Chinese people who deny Chinese civilization should read a little bit of Western history first, and learn a little bit about the history of the founding and development of Western countries. For example, why are the millions of Indians in the United States gone? How come there are so many colonies in the world, for example? For example, how did the Opium War break out in China? What happened to the 8-power Allied forces? Then you come to praise the so-called civilization of the West, and then discredit the Chinese civilization that has nurtured the Chinese nation, including your ancestors, for thousands of years. Okay. China is the basic culture of ethics, while the West is the basic culture of contract. Feudal cultural tyranny has hindered the progress of science and technology, but our national degeneration is not easy to accept new things. The success of the Meiji Restoration and the failure of the reform movement of 1898 proved this point. Total westernization of Russia proved unfeasible as well. It is impossible for a nation's quality to change suddenly without being divorced from reality. If you study hard, if everyone makes a small step forward, the country and the nation will make a big step forward. Science is not unique to, or equivalent to, Western civilization. There was science in ancient China, but it was not developed well. It is just that the modern West has developed science the best. Now China is catching up in science, and it will definitely surpass it in the future. Does it mean that modern civilization will become Chinese civilization after surpassing it? What would happen without Western civilization? Western civilization is based on capital, and everything revolves around capital. The civilization of China is built on the basis of people, and the people are the king and the country is the second. The government must serve the officials well, and the officials must serve the common people well. The common people are the most important wealth. This time the current epidemic situation best embodies the people-oriented and respect for life. Chinese civilization, good knowledge. Research directly on the human body, life, and the universe. Western civilization redeveloped after the Great Flood, and it was transmitted by evil alien creatures, which have great plans for human beings. The situation in the world is clear to anyone who cares about the fact that people do not believe in gods and worship materials to the point of destruction. The West is all about smashing, looting, and burning. From the Roman Empire to the empire on which the sun never sets to the United States, it's all a routine. Invasion everywhere. If force is not enough, use economic and cultural aggression. To sum it up, in China is bullying. Such civilizations are short-lived. It's just the jungle of the jungle. Eastern civilization is self-reliance, seeking common ground while reserving differences, and pursuing the kingly way. Western culture is fundamentally beyond the so-called civilization. Western cultural thought is based on religion. Religious beliefs and thoughts always exclude any other nation. Even the most powerful internal nation in the United States is opposed to each other. And discriminatory. In March of this year, Oriental Publishing House released Yuan Qin's new work The Change of Civilization, Paris 1896, looking for Li Hongzhang. In 1896, Li Hongzhang visited on behalf of the Qing government, and Paris was an important stop. More than 100 years later, According to the newspaper records and declassified official files at that time, Bian Qin visited Li Hongjiang one by one. The changes of civilization are in the footprints of two Chinese people separated by 100 years. Bian Qin said, "The focus of this book is not to interpret China, but to allow readers to experience the collision of 19th century industrial civilization and ancient agricultural civilization in a metropolis that has completed the first industrial revolution through Li Hongjiang's journey to the west." The narrative of history implies the passion of reality. Bian Qin opened a window for a new understanding of the West. The landscape she presents is quite different from what we are used to. The rediscovery of the 19th century has had an earth-shaking impact. Qing reading, first of all, I would like to ask you about the origin of writing your new book Changes of Civilization, Paris 1896, looking for Li Hongjiang. How did you notice Li Hongjiang's trip to France? Bian Qin, as early as when I was writing the book A Mirror Walking Along the Road, due to a lot of reading, I came into contact with the 19th century in the West. This contact is more in-depth and detailed than the previous general understanding of world history in China. From this we can see that that century was unusual, and that the chariot of capital and its goal of globalization that have held back the destiny of mankind has been fully launched since then, and its large-scale industrialization and social transformation have many similar trajectories to today's China. The great changes in the world today can all find their fuse in that century, including the antithesis East, agricultural society, that was found to set off the industrialized West, which predetermined our thinking concepts. The re-understanding of the 19th century had a somewhat earth-shaking influence on me. Why do you say that? Because the 19th century is a fatal century for us. It is the century that opened the unprecedented internal collapse of Chinese civilization. No matter how many powerful alien races invaded the Central Plains for thousands of years, Chinese civilization has never lost its cultural confidence. However, the 19th century was also conquered by force, and it was not fully occupied by the military. However, it shook the unshaken foundation and made us live on that fall to this day. Until the 1980s and 1990s and even today, we are still using the diverted path of civilization comparison to conclude that China is backward and the West is advanced, and then draw obvious conclusions. This led off-road locked my thinking track for a long time and on a large scale, until I took advantage of the convenience of traveling and came into contact with first-hand information, and I was able to bypass the leaders of public opinion and their interpretations specially for us. Go deep into the details that have been filtered out long ago, and enter the scene lost after conversion, and then suddenly realize the point that Western theorists have always avoided reminding backward countries, that is, the relationship between the advanced West and the backward China. The real determinant of the world is not the difference between civilizations, but big capital and industrialization. As long as you go deep into France in the great industrial boom of the 19th century, the truth hits your face that industrialization has changed everything and created everything from nothing. Industrial civilization is different from any kind of classical civilization of human beings. Comparing industrialized society with agricultural society, summing up the differences between civilizations, and then introducing the opposition between democracy and autocracy is a deliberate misleading. False prescriptions issued. This discovery was accompanied by another discovery, that is, since the 19th century, a Chinese discourse that has not changed fundamentally has been formed in the West since the 19th century, a discourse directed at China. This discourse started from that century, changed the discourse before the 18th century, and produced its fixed mode, which I call the conquest mode. Background. This discourse constitutes the international public opinion that dominates from the spiritual level and induces a large number of Chinese cultural elites, opening up another battlefield of conquest besides the military battlefield. If these two discoveries are taken together, they are actually two sides of the same big process. This big process is the globalization that the term itself has not yet been designed at that time. Corner of the figure. From this perspective, the 19th century and today are connected by a line. Li Hongjiang's westward journey at the end of the 19th century also went beyond the two narrow points of the relationship between China and the West, revealing the chessboard, chess pieces, and chess games hidden under it. This is the background for my attention to Li Hongjiang's journey to the West. Of course, there are also some accidental factors, such as accidentally catching a glimpse of a front page of Little Daily on Sunday, July 26, 1896 at a second-hand newsstand in Paris. The vassal King Li Hongjiang. These inevitable and accidental factors make me think that if China's first official visit to the West in the 19th century can be interpreted through the Chinese discourse of the West, the Qing court sent a delegation to Europe in 1866, although it was also an official faction, but in name it was an unofficial non-governmental interview, especially when the participant was Li Hongzhang. It is of extraordinary significance for Chinese people to think about the two discoveries I mentioned. If you read this book carefully, you will realize that when I traced the footprints of Special Envoy Li's travels in France, I tried to restore the atmosphere of the 19th century in my descriptions of some key events and places, so that readers who are interested in modern history can appreciate the absence of historical records in history books. The details, and then think about why China in the 19th century fell to that point. Of course, my purpose is not to do history, although every detail about Li's travels in the book has its source, and I dare not add imagination. I prefer that readers regard it as a literary essay on tracing and tracing, so that they can follow my tracing more relaxedly to appreciate the earth-shattering 19th century. Qing reading, your book not only traces the footsteps of Li Hongzhang, but also presents the century-old changes in Paris. Comparing the present and the past, what is your deepest feeling during the search? Bian Qin, my deepest feeling is the speed at which the colonial empires retreated to their original boundaries, and the revenge of the weak. Most of the beautiful France that Chinese tourists see today is the legacy left by colonial plunder and rapid industrialization. Century has been difficult to do. Just look at how many treasures in the great museums in Paris were dug out from the ground, and you will know it well. But if you look at the 200 years of history, the turbulent conquest also brought back the water. Almost every continent that was conquered returned more or less a little bit of poverty and humbleness. Government tenements on the fringes of every major city are filled with immigrants from distant conquests, doing jobs the French won't do, living in ugly neighborhoods between elegant city centers and idyllic countryside, and proliferating in order to receive government benefits. Childbirth benefits for postponing an aging society. Although industrialization and consumer society have provided ample material life, they are also destroying the inner mechanism that guarantees the continuity of a civilization at a rapid speed. This is very scary. The self-dissolution of the social organism in the dance and peace is happening right under your nose. Europe is indeed aging rapidly in terms of civilization. Qing reading, in your new book, you talk about Europe aging rapidly in luxury. Over the years, France is still admirable, but there are also voices in China that speak badly of France, Europe, and even the entire Western world, such as distrust of Western democracy, ridicule of white leftists, etc. What is your opinion on this? Bian Qin, I personally think that using the word bad-mouthing has a slightly derogatory connotation. It is better to say that things have returned to their original positions, the truth has surfaced, and the fictional value bubble is being squeezed out little by little. The distrust of Western democracy is because people who have seen it on the ground find that it is far from the democracy we thought, and should be called an illusion of democracy. Of course, being able to make the illusion that the common people take it seriously and that the world admires it is also a remarkable generosity. In this regard, I sincerely admire the upper elites in the West. Europe is indeed aging rapidly, from a civilizational point of view. About 10 years ago, Time magazine in the United States published an article to the effect that French culture is dead, which aroused hysterical reactions in the French intellectual circles. As an outsider, objectively speaking, I feel the same way. In fact, not only France, but Western culture as a whole is degenerating. There are many reasons, among which capital monopoly leads to vulgarization and childishness of culture, political correctness dominates the world, and insufficient births lead to rapid growth of low-quality population, which are the main sticking points. In the final analysis, capital rules by making the people more stupid. China has only been engaged in a market economy for 30 years. You can see how flattering and vulgar the culture has become today. People have been doing it for 200 years, so it's not bad if they can keep up with this. I said in the book that civilization is becoming more and more splendid as it goes forward. It is a fool's dream, which is the reason. The culture as a whole has fallen, and the hotbed for producing heroes no longer exists, and there is no soil for absorption. The West we admired in the 20th century was the historical peak born of the glory of industrialization in the 19th century and the short-term escape from the spiritual shackles of monotheism. One rises and the other falls, shattering the relatively balanced world before the 19th century, resulting in necessary admiration and unrealistic worship. This state cannot be maintained permanently, not to mention that people on the peak are self-confident. Praising primitive culture and protecting minority groups, how primitive is music and dance? How does contemporary art degenerate art? All the dark hands aimed at destroying the country did not improve the culture. How many phantoms of independence and freedom in the spiritual field of France are left? The shadow of political correctness hangs over almost every field of culture. Just take the movies I am most familiar with as an example. Apart from the visible freedom of undressing, the control of the system is pervasive. For those who can see, all politics is in command. This kind of politics in command is very different from the direct shouting of slogans that we Chinese understand. The system here is not the government, and the control is not explicit, but covered, with deep skills. The Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival has almost become a tool of political struggle and a weapon of global conquest. We Chinese will wonder if we think about it, why does a cultural organization that is non-governmental, private, and independent of the political power have such a mission? Millions of French people took to the streets to strongly oppose the legalization of gay marriage, and the film festival immediately presented a gay film and gave it the highest honor. Iran was sanctioned, and the film festival became the base camp of its anti-government artists. In order to overthrow the Syrian regime, no level of film can be shortlisted exceptionally. No matter in France or abroad, the highest art selection standard is the dark line of politics. So many real talents are buried, and so many false names are given. What kind of culture can withstand such a long-term toss by dark hands? Ching reading, Europe is indeed full of problems at present. European civilization itself seems to have reached an anxious juncture. Do you think European civilization has the ability to weather the storm and repair itself? Bian Qin, first, let's define a concept. I personally think that the scope of the European civilization you mentioned is not easy to define. I understand that you refer to Western Europe, which is the country that first experienced the Industrial Revolution and colonial expansion in modern times. In order to avoid conceptual entanglement, it is better to use Western civilization to define a clearer boundary, which is their own concept. The rise of Western civilization has an essential factor, which is that it is closely accompanied by the strength of the military, that is to say, it is not developed, but fought. This is very different from ours. In the long history of Chinese civilization, the disdain of the East was not based on military destruction of opponents, but on developed farming and handicraft industries. Industrialization has completely put an end to the balance of power in the age of cold weapons, making Western Europe, these small belligerent countries in history, invincible all over the world, rapidly occupying and controlling global resources and markets through colonialism at an unimaginable speed in the classical era, and establishing a historically unprecedented huge empire that has never been seen. You must know that the borders of the British and French empires once bordered China. Therefore, Western civilization stands out from the crowd in modern times, and there are two unavoidable factors: one is colonialism, and the other is the Industrial Revolution. The prerequisite for these two factors is that the opponent can be destroyed in advance in the military, so as to benefit oneself from stealing. Even if the history is not expressed, it is already there. It is through colonial plunder and industrialization that Europe quickly accumulated huge wealth. Later, the Western civilization that made other civilizations in the world feel inferior was built on the accumulation of wealth of. However, history has not proven how Western civilization will behave when it goes against the trend if it is no longer possible to point out where to fight and where to weaken or destroy the opponent in advance. It is difficult to compare this with the history of Chinese civilization's nirvana amidst adverse trends. There have been similar crises in the West in the past, and their solution is war. Foreign wars are a shortcut for the West to solve internal problems. The crisis facing the West today is not only caused by itself, but also by external challenges. They are losing their absolute leading position in the Industrial Revolution. China, a miserable country that was defeated by them in the 19th century, overtakes the car with great difficulty, making all the conveniences of the unfair world they have single-handedly managed no longer so natural. This is what they did not expect, and I really doubt whether the West will have the ability to repair itself and maintain cultural hegemony for a long time once it loses its dominant position. The right to speak in the West consists of a perfect technique. Qing reading, several of your books are dedicated to revealing the hidden discourse mechanism of Western civilization, and you feel that Chinese people have generally lost aesthetic rights, moral rights, and historical interpretation rights without knowing it. How did you pay attention to this issue? Is it related to your living experience in France? For example, several major events in 2008 awakened the national consciousness of many Chinese people. What about you? Bian Qin, 2008 was just a year when there was a strong inflection point, but the mental preparation was much earlier than this year. The essence of Western society is a bit like the essence of Westerners. The collection is extremely deep, and then it is wrapped up layer by layer to present the side that you want to see, such as being stronger than you. He first said it was because Christ was on their side, and then he said yes, derived from the democratic freedoms that existed in ancient Greece. If you read the books and newspapers of the 19th century, you will find that the word democracy was not so frequently talked about as it is now. At that time, the main emphasis was on the invincibility of Christianity and racial superiority, which was more straightforward than it is now. Chinese who have lived or settled in the West for a long time will face a choice sooner or later, which side you are on. No one is openly forcing you, but the deep-rooted anti-China and anti-Chinese will send Chinese people into three camps. The most extensive group I call self-interested faction. All their energy is devoted to fighting for themselves, regardless of how Westerners treat their home country. They only strive to survive in a narrow place. The second group of people I call integration faction. The characteristic of this group of people is, don't you hate China? Then I hate China more than you. If you slap China once, I will slap three. Only in this way can we live in peace. This is not an exaggeration at all, either numb or better than you. If you don't do this, you have to fall into the third group of people, the repressive group. The characteristic of this group of people is that they are burdened by their conscience and have been in mental depression for a long time. Sensitive people may even feel the pain of being ironed from time to time. This was the reality before 2010, and the situation has improved since, but the basic reality is difficult to fundamentally reverse. In such a situation, you can only choose one of these three camps, and you can't even talk about choosing, but follow your own nature. If you can be numb, you will live a little more peacefully. You can be more than you if you can't change your mind. You can only learn from it. It was through painful lessons that I was able to bypass the presupposed words of the West, read, observe, think, and then discover something. Qing reading. After World War II, a trend of anti-Westernism gradually appeared in the Western cultural and academic circles. What do you think of the anti-Westernism rising in the West? Ian Chin. This is part of the public opinion preparation for the big goal of globalization. As early as the end of World War II, the world ruling group had planned to deconstruct the physical colonial empire because it was unsustainable and the cost was too high, especially the moral cost. The new forms of economic colonization and spiritual colonization have large benefits and low costs, and there is no need for military invasion and occupation in the 19th century. If you look at China today, you can see it at a glance. In the 1930s, even in Shanghai, where there were many concessions, could you find a person who dyed blonde hair and got a foreign name? The current Western-centric theory doesn't need that end to be publicly listed at all, and this end can already be produced and sold on its own. Qing reading. China needs to establish its own voice in the world. So, if we need to compete with the West for aesthetic rights, moral rights, and historical interpretation rights, what method do you think should be adopted? Ian Chin. To be honest, this question is hard to answer. On the one hand, the discourse power of the West is in a sense constituted by a perfect technique. If we want to build our own discourse power, we must first understand the Western discourse skills, because this is a battlefield without gunpowder. For example, the detail relay of the movie I discovered is one of the combat skills. The so-called detail relay of the movie is to use the influence of the picture on the subconscious mind of people, and repeatedly use the same kind of details to carry out mental transformation. Since the details are not the theme of a movie, they are even outside the plot. It can be a seemingly inadvertent word, or a noun mentioned by chance, or a prop, or the image of a certain type of person, or the atmosphere of a certain scene. But if these details are consciously implanted in the images of various movies for a long time, the secretly formed relay can control the audience's subconscious unconsciously. It should be admitted that Western research on human psychology is ahead of ours. We have not made this a strategic goal and invested a lot of manpower and material resources like missiles and satellites. The real rulers of the West, not the government cabinet, hide behind the scenes, knowing that gentle dictatorship and discourse rule are the ruling weapons of the present and future world, and they have devoted themselves to research as early as the first half of the last century. Over the past 30 years, some Western scholars who have traveled to China's cities, towns, and villages in the name of anthropology, psychology, and even remote areas are mostly engaged in intelligence collection in this area. In terms of soft power, Our comparison with the West is still in the unequal state of spears and swords versus artillery warships in the 19th century. If we do not catch up, it is only wishful thinking to build our own right to speak. On the other hand, if our elites cannot realize how aesthetic rights, moral rights, and historical interpretation rights have been changed hands unknowingly, how can they recapture them? We voluntarily hand over these three powers to Oscar, Palme d'Or, Golden Bear, Nobel, Grammy, and sinologists. Humbleness does not mean losing confidence. I recently came across the documentary Southern Song Dynasty filmed by a TV station in Zhejiang. When analyzing the history of the Southern Song Dynasty, this film divided the right of historical interpretation to four groups of experts with a rare fairness in the world: Germany, Japan, the United States, and China. Chinese historians have not received the slightest partiality, not for the Lord, but for no more or less of them. Although the documentary does not contradict the views of Chinese and Western experts, it is clearly telling viewers that the views of Chinese Song Dynasty history scholars are not credible, and foreign, Western, experts must testify. Just imagine if the French made a documentary explaining the Napoleonic Wars, would they ask Chinese historians to intervene? So first of all, we must wake up and realize ourselves. Eastern and Western civilizations have evolved two different civilizations according to different trajectories in a relatively isolated situation, both of which have made contributions to world civilization, and both have their own advantages and disadvantages. Generally speaking, Western civilization has made greater contributions to modern times, especially in the advancement of science and technology and commerce. Eastern civilization has made greater contributions to ancient times, and its contributions to humanities and social systems are more prominent. Analyzing the advantages and disadvantages of a civilization mainly depends on its contribution to social progress and its outstanding achievements in economy, technology, and cultural systems. 1. Western civilization. 1. Economy. The West controlled a large number of colonies through great voyages, and completed capital accumulation through bloody plunder of the colonies. After the completion of primitive accumulation, capitalist countries started the process of commercialization. They invented a whole set of commercial systems and endorsed these commercial systems with the power of the state, which greatly promoted the development of the commodity economy and produced a huge amount of social product. However, with the development and growth of capital, we have also entered the commercial era, and the status of businessmen is at the highest level in history. The capitalists began to control the state power and constantly influenced state policies to suit their own interests. After the businessmen took control of the state power, they only focused on their own interests. The current capitalist state power is basically oligarchy. Monopoly oligopoly does not care about the life and death of other people in the society, which leads to unfair distribution of social wealth and serious polarization between rich and poor, which can easily lead to social turmoil. This is a common problem in capitalist countries. It depends on whether the government is strong and has the ability to cut these monopoly capitals. 2. Culture. Now the main control of public opinion in the world is still in the hands of countries, and the media industry is also divided into levels. The most upstream media, such as the BBC, CNN, and the 6 major Hollywood film companies, are all controlled by the Jews. To export culture and invade other countries, they invented a set of universal values to brainwash other countries. Emphasizing that their system, culture, and way of life are the most advanced, and allowing other countries to develop according to their path, they have successfully cultivated batch after batch of public intellectuals in other countries. Using these public intellectuals, the public knowledge easily controls a country, locks other countries at the bottom of the industrial chain, and completely reduces them to their slaves. This kind of cultural colonization and economic colonization is much more hidden than the early colonial occupation of other countries. The territory is much more advanced. For example, Nelson Mandela in South Africa is a typical example of public knowledge disrupting a country. Nelson Mandela, who had been in prison for 20 years, became the president of South Africa as soon as he was released. In fact, he had no experience in governing the country. South Africa has turned South Africa into an economic colony of the West. South Africa opened up its finances, and a large number of high-quality assets were successfully bought by Western countries. He became a revolutionary fighter and won the Nobel Peace Prize. It seems that Western countries also have a strong political bias in awarding the Nobel Prize, which is not as fair as they say. 3. Technology. A group of philosophers in ancient Greece gave birth to philosophy in constant debate. Rome conquered Greece, but Greek culture conquered Rome. But after the fall of the
怎么样？
Western Roman Empire in AD 476, there was also a cultural hiatus. It is hard to believe that the West accidentally invented modern science in the process of revival of ancient Greek culture. The birth of science is very accidental. The main tools are philosophical speculation and the development of theology. To glorify God, to argue against the Creator, and to accidentally invent a scientific theory system. The development of science has enabled the West to point out the technology tree, leading the three industrial revolutions, and the development of science and technology has greatly magnified the advantages of Western countries. Part of the reason for the development and growth of Western countries in the field of science and technology is that they respect individual rights and personal freedom. Only the liberation of people can give full play to their creativity. Patent rights protect individual inventions, which greatly encourages the enthusiasm of individuals to create and invent. Western countries do have an adventurous spirit and are good at breakthroughs in the field of science and technology. They have led the direction of technological development time and time again. 2. Eastern civilization. 1. Economy. The East has been beaten by Western countries for hundreds of years, and most countries have become colonies of Western countries. Even after World War II, it is difficult to get rid of the economic colonization of Western countries. Has been at the bottom of the industrial chain, and has been reduced to a foundry in Western countries. Among the Asian countries, only Japan and China had the earliest nation-state awakening and rose up to resist the rule of Western countries. Japan was the first country to rise up to resist. It was once successful, but after World War II it was completely controlled by the United States, and it is not now. Turnover. The past 40 years have been the history of China's rapid development. We have obtained capital and technology through integration into the economic system dominated by Western countries, and achieved rapid development. We have chosen a correct path, and we are also beneficiaries of globalization. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union began to decline. Not only did the Soviet Union have problems with its system, but it even had the wrong technology tree in terms of technology. Fortunately, China decisively abandoned the Soviet Union's path and chose to get closer to the United States. 2. Culture. During the spring and autumn period and the Warring States period, the academic contention of various schools of thought gave birth to theories of various schools, and the Chinese ideological and cultural system basically determined its form during the Qin Han Empire period. Chinese intellectuals have always had a strong sense of family and country, and took reforming society as their own responsibility. The early sages could sit down with the king and publicize their own ideas of governing the country, hoping that the king would adopt it. After the Qin dynasty unified the world, the situation changed. The rulers began to gradually abolish some useless miscellaneous studies. Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty abolished theories of 100 schools of thought and only respected Confucianism was actually the first time to unify thinking. Academics must serve politics, and intellectuals must be used by the country, and cannot be dissociated from the system, otherwise their development will be restricted. Moism's non-aggression and universal love is an idealism, similar to the idea of utopia. This kind of world harmony idea does not meet the needs of rulers at all, and Moism takes a high-end root and absorbs social elites into its system. This practice was feared by the rulers. Moism has neither a superstructure nor a bottom-level mass base, so the Mahist theory gradually disappeared. Confucianism divides the people at the bottom into invisible ranks and requires the people to abide by order, which meets the needs of governance, so Confucianism is adopted by the rulers. In the whole set of order constructed by Confucianism, no matter what level you are in, you can feel the pressure from above. The thought of hardship is the only way to succeed has become a belief that runs through our lives. People in the Confucian civilization circle in East Asia are very depressed, and they are desperately trying to climb up all their lives. China completed the earliest centralization of power in the Qin dynasty more than 2,000 years ago, and its ability to centralize power surpassed that of any other country, and it was able to realize the earliest general mobilization of the country. The essence of Eastern civilization is centralization. The purpose of all systems is to complete centralization. The will of the monarch is the will of the country. Individuals need to transfer most of their rights to the country, and the outstanding elites are concentrated in the center. This kind of system has both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that it can concentrate the power of the state to do big things, so East Asia has always been a monster house, and it is easy to explode the army and explode the economy. The disadvantage is that every time we complete the great unification, we will become very closed and fall into stock competition internally. Once there is a problem with the center of power, the country will fall into turmoil and go through another cycle, similar to restarting after a crash, everything I have to do it all over again. In fact, the most dangerous moment for Chinese civilization should have been during the southern and northern dynasties, when it was almost destroyed. Buddhism was introduced to China in the Eastern Han Dynasty and flourished in the southern and northern dynasties. This foreign cultural invasion posed a huge challenge to China's native culture and almost caused a fault in Chinese civilization. 4 Wonders of Hanku. Establish a heart for the world, and a life for the people. In order to inherit the unique knowledge of the past saints, and to bring peace to all generations. The spirit of virtue and self-improvement has made Chinese civilization have a long history, and China has become the only remaining 4 ancient civilizations. 3. Technology. Although there are 4 major inventions in China, they are all practical technologies and have not formed a complete theoretical system. Modern science is a kind of refined analysis and formulate theoretical summary. The advantage of this theory is that it is very intuitive and convenient for subsequent inheritance and learning. Therefore, it took only a few hundred years for the West to realize the technological explosion. We regard ourselves as the center of the world, and this mentality not only enhances our national self-confidence, but also produces arrogance and prejudice. A big reason for our backwardness in modern times is the backwardness of science and technology. We did not actively learn from Western technology, which led to the generational difference in weapons, which made us very disadvantaged in the face of Western armed invasion. However, the centralized system of Eastern civilization allows us to catch up very quickly, but it is hard to say whether we can surpass after catching up, or is it involving in another larger circle. 3 Conclusion. The Western-style democratic system has certain advantages in distribution, but if a late developing country adopts the system, it is very easy to fall into internal friction, unable to concentrate on industrialization, and the country will always fall at the bottom of the industrial chain. Moreover, political gatherings on the streets have become a malignant tumor, which can easily become a tool for color revolutions and be used for peaceful evolution. The West is exporting their values as a way to subvert other countries. The rapid rise of China is a major threat to the Ansa people. The Chinese nation is extremely tenacious and intelligent, stronger than any nation they have encountered before. The Germanic nation and the Yamato nation have challenged the Ansa people, but they all failed. But this time the Ansa people are likely to lose the war. What he has to face is the strongest nation in the world. Grow into a giant. The Chinese nation is the most outstanding nation in the world. We are different from the cunning of the Jews, and we are not as cruel as the Angsa people. The advantage of China is that it has a long and good political and historical tradition. As long as we do not have internal problems, we will definitely die US.
去投房地，他也头疼得很，他跟我说，我说我不管钱，但是你要是我就跟你讲，你要想买房，你就找那个网站，你找到房子，我就给你约了去看，完事儿。那没办法，你可以用谷歌翻译啊，谷歌可以翻译成，谷歌，你没关系，你就这个就是你就是谷歌 Google Translate。稍微等等，我给你弄过去，我这边还录个音，可以等等啊。